Last week we were with Jehoiakim back in probably 97, 597, 598 BC, something like that. We've jumped forward many years here. It could be as many as 20 years. We've jumped back to the time of the fall of Jerusalem. Things are really bad. We've been here on many different occasions, um, and we're back again. That we are very, very close in time to Jeremiah 32 that we went through a couple months ago. Um, so this is during the fall of Jerusalem. The events of these three chapters, 37, 38, 39, are arranged chronologically. They go in order for once, for a few chapters. Um, they are tracing Jeremiah's life and his ministry during the final siege and fall of Jerusalem, and that will happen in 586 BC. And so we are in the reign of Zedekiah, the last king proper of, of Jerusalem, Judah. We start out in Jeremiah 37:1. This is Zedekiah's vain hope. Now, King Zedekiah, son of Josiah, good King Zedekiah, or Josiah, this is the last of his sons to rule, reigned instead of Coniah. Coniah, we mostly have heard referred to as Jehoiachin. It's also known as Jeconiah and Coniah, the three names. And he was the son of Jehoiakim, who was Zedekiah's brother. Okay, his little bit older brother, Jehoiakim, we saw last week, and had begun reigning depending on where we are, well, we're at the end. So it had been at least 11 years since Jehoiakim had died, and possibly, yes, so it's probably about 11 years since Jehoiakim had died, his brother. Uh, so it was Nebuchadnezzar king of Babylon, who made Zedekiah king in the land of Judah. So just very quickly, Josiah, just a quick history of the ancient world. Babylon, the Neo-Babylonian Empire, had come and was fighting against Assyria. And there was a big, long battle at a place called Carchemish, the Battle of Carchemish. And Egypt was an ally of Assyria. Assyria had been the bad guy for a long time. They'd been the big boy on the block. They had gotten weak as Babylon had risen up in power. And so Babylon and Assyria squared off at Carchemish, and Egypt helped Assyria as an ally. Now, the Pharaoh in Egypt was Necho II. So as he came up the coast of the Levant, that is the land of Israel, Josiah went out and met him at Megiddo and was, I believe, shot by arrows and killed there. So then Necho came over to Jerusalem and set up Jehoahaz, who was Jehoiakim's brother, as king for 3 months. And then Necho took him away and put Jehoiakim in as king. Jehoiakim was king for 11 years, and at some point, while Jehoiakim was king, Babylon defeated Assyria and Egypt and came down and laid siege to Israel. And Jehoiakim began paying them tribute. He became a vassal king to, I believe it was still Nabopolassar at that point, who was Nebuchadnezzar's father, but it might have been Nebuchadnezzar. Anyway, he paid tribute. Well, then, yes, it was Nabopolassar. Nebuchadnezzar was like the general of the army. At some point, Nabopolassar went back to Babylon and died. Nebuchadnezzar left and took his army with him because he was thinking, if I don't get back to Babylon, somebody else will be king when I get back. So he took his army, he lifted the siege. Jehoiakim said, well, I guess they're gone. Now the Babylonians are gone. So he stopped paying tribute. Then back came Nebuchadnezzar, I think 4 years after that, laid siege. That was the 597 siege. And Jehoiakim died. mysteriously as Nebuchadnezzar was coming. Many think that he was assassinated, and his son, Coniah, who they renamed Jehoiachin, became the king. So Josiah, Jehoiakim, Jehoiachin became the king, uh, appointed by Nebuchadnezzar, who let him be king for 3 months and then took him to Babylon. Now that's important because he kept him there as a prisoner of state. And so Jeconiah was in prison for a little while, but then he was taken out of prison and made a part of Nebuchadnezzar's court. He ate at Nebuchadnezzar's table, I believe I'm right on that, and had somewhat of an honored status in Babylon, which is important because Jeconiah had sons, those sons had sons, and that is where the line for Jesus, the Messianic line, went through Jeconiah. So he's over in Babylon, and Nebuchadnezzar appoints Jeconiah's uncle, and his name growing up was Mattaniah, and then they changed it to Zedekiah, which Yahweh is righteous is what that means, when he became king. So Zedekiah was appointed by Nebuchadnezzar. That's what that verse 1, that's a summary of what verse 1 is telling us. But neither Zedekiah nor his servants, his officials, nor the people of the land gave heed to the words of Yahweh, which he spoke by the prophet Jeremiah. Jeremiah was extremely unpopular among the people. In fact, what we kind of see in this chapter, that Zedekiah was not necessarily an evil king. He was a weak-willed king. And so he let bad people have more influence than he should in Jerusalem. And that he actually, we'll see here in a little bit, he kind of protects Jeremiah just a little bit from some of these people. But nobody really gave Jeremiah any credence, really listened to him at all. So Zedekiah was the final king in Jerusalem, placed on the throne as a vassal king by Nebuchadnezzar, the Babylonian suzerain, which means the big king. And we saw that what I just summarized, we're told about in 2 Kings 24:15. So Nebuchadnezzar led Jehoiachin away into exile in Babylon. Then Nebuchadnezzar made his uncle Mattaniah king in his place and changed Mattaniah's name to Zedekiah. Zedekiah was 21 when he became king, and so he was a young man. That was a lot of pressure to be the king. He reigned 11 years in Jerusalem. And Zedekiah, back to 586 or so, and Zedekiah the king sent Jehuichal, the son of Shelemiah. We don't see that name anywhere else, so I don't have any information on him. And Zephaniah, son of Maaseiah, the priest, to Jeremiah, saying, "Pray now to Yahweh, our God, for us." So there's something going on that we'll find out here in a minute about, that they are very hopeful about. And they secretly send emissaries to ask Jeremiah to pray for Jerusalem. So that's a good thing. Now, we saw Zephaniah back in, where was it? Chapter 26. But there it was. We were told Zephaniah succeeded Jehoiada, the priest, as second in rank to the high priest Sariah. So he's the number 2 priest, Zephaniah was. So Zephaniah was the second highest religious leader in Judah. Later, after the fall of Jerusalem, Zephaniah was executed by Nebuchadnezzar. So Zedekiah wanted to send these guys secretly to Jeremiah because Jeremiah was very disliked. So he didn't send the high priest to see him, but he sent an important man to go talk to Jeremiah and ask him to pray for things. What do you think Jeremiah's going to do or say? We've been here 36 chapters. What do you think Jeremiah's going to? So Zedekiah wants Jeremiah to pray that Nebuchadnezzar leaves them alone forever. What do you think Jeremiah's going to say?
Whatever the Lord tells him.
Well, yeah, and what's the Lord going to tell him?
Babylon
Too bad.
away.
Yep. So Jeremiah, at this point, they make a note, and this will help us in putting order, chronology to things. It gives us a note that Jeremiah is still free at this point. So we've already seen, back in chapter 32, we have seen that Jeremiah was later in prison. Now Jeremiah was coming and going among the people freely at this point, for they had not yet put him in prison. Then Pharaoh's army came up from Egypt again to challenge the Babylonians, who are also called the Chaldeans. Later, that is a later designation for them. So that shows that there's some editing has gone on, because probably, I think at the time of Jeremiah, they were not called Chaldeans, but they may have been. Anyway, or it may have been during Jeremiah's time they were called Chaldeans, and when they're called Chaldeans, it says Abraham was from Ur of the Chaldeans. That wasn't written by Moses. That was somebody edited that in using a later name. So I believe they might have been Chaldeans, called Chaldeans at the time of Jeremiah, but they had not been previously. Anyway, that's not an important point. When the Chaldeans, but that's the Babylonians, Chaldeans. And when Chaldeans besieging Jerusalem heard the news of Egypt coming up the coast to challenge them, they departed. So suddenly the siege was gone. And the background, so they sent the secret emissaries to ask Jeremiah to pray that they're gone forever, that God will keep the Babylonians gone, and we can go back to being the wicked nation we were before the Babylonian came. Do our own thing. So here was the prophecy that Jeremiah sent. Then the word of Yahweh came to Jeremiah, saying, Thus says Yahweh, God of Israel, say to King of Judah, Zedekiah, who sent you to me to inquire of me, who asked you to pray, Behold, Pharaoh's army, which has come up to help you, will return to Egypt, to their own land. They'll be turned back by Babylon. And the Chaldeans shall come back. The Chaldeans shall come back and fight against this city and eventually take it and burn it. I believe they laid siege 3 years total, and burn it with fire. Don't deceive yourself, saying, The Chaldeans will surely depart from us, for they will not depart. Come on, Jeremiah. Can't we get some good news? Not too much. We had the book of consolation there. That was God won't forget you, but never has Jeremiah falsely encouraged people or given them false hope. Verse 10, For though you had defeated, even if you defeated the whole army of the Chaldeans who fight against you, and there remained only wounded men among them, they would still rise up and burn the city. In other words, even if you have some momentary success, it's a losing proposition. God has foreordained the fall of the city of Jerusalem to the Babylonians. Nothing you can do. Not what Zedekiah wanted to hear. So Jeremiah is still free. He sends word back to Zedekiah. Now, I prayed and God said it's too bad, gonna happen. Now it happened when the Chaldeans left the siege of Jerusalem for fear of Pharaoh's army, that Jeremiah planned to go check on his property. So Jerusalem is here. Anathoth, where he lives, is a couple miles to the northeast of Jerusalem. You cross the line into Benjamin, which the line for the tribe of Benjamin, or the territory of Benjamin, is right at Jerusalem. He has to travel over into Benjamin and up to Anathoth. Now, in modern Jerusalem, Anathoth is a suburb within the major city, the metropolitan area of Jerusalem. But then it was a village outside. Jeremiah went out of Jerusalem to go into the land of Benjamin to claim his property there. The word is halak, meaning to divide or a portion, or he was doing something with property, possibly getting it ready to sell. Now, at first glance, we want to say, this must have been the property that God told him to buy as a, to show that God was going to return the people to the land. That was back in chapter 32, and that was the book of consolation. And part of his prophecy was to buy land, even after there was a great siege on, to show that we would return, the Jews would return. So when he was at the gate of Benjamin, the gate, it would be a gate on the north of the city going into the territory of Benjamin, a captain of the guard named Irijah, and Irijah just means fear of Yahweh, son of Shelemiah, son of Hananiah, sees Jeremiah saying, "You are defecting to the Chaldeans." So Jeremiah was disliked, and he was recognized. And I don't know if Irijah really thought that, or if he was just looking. I think a lot of people were really angry at Jeremiah for the bad fortune. Jeremiah was a focus point, and they would say, "Are you doing God's will?" "Yes." "What's God's will?" "The fall of Jerusalem." They just hated him. He wouldn't back off. So they grabbed him and arrested him. They're saying, "You're trying to escape Jerusalem and go over to the Chaldeans. You're a rat fleeing the sinking ship." Now, this is not the property that he bought in chapter 32, most likely, and this is the reasoning. He was already in chapter 32 confined to the courtyard prison when he bought that property. And that was part of the thing. He was in prison for telling that Jerusalem would fall, and he bought a property, and he made an official thing, and he went to the gate, and he made everything very legal and paid the full price for the land that a relative was offering him. So that the events of chapter 37, most likely, best we can tell, happened before the land purchase in chapter 32. Then Jeremiah said to the captain of the guard, "That's false. I'm not defecting to the Chaldeans." But Irijah did not listen to him. So Irijah, fear of Yahweh, but not in name only, seized Jeremiah and brought him to the princes. And so, most likely, a similar assembly that we saw last week in chapter 36. However, that had been an assembly 20 years earlier. And so they're not as nice to, that Baruch went and read to the princes, and they presented it to Zedekiah and advised Jeremiah to hide. Well, they've gotten tired of Jeremiah, it seems. Therefore, the princes were angry with Jeremiah, and they struck him and put him in prison in the house of Jonathan. The name Jonathan means gift of Yahweh, the scribe. For they had made that the prison. They had made a prison out of the house of this scribe. Find out a little bit more. Now, Zedekiah calls to Jeremiah, but first let's talk about this prison. When Jeremiah entered, it says in the New King James, when Jeremiah entered the dungeon and the cells, and Jeremiah had remained there for many days. That's bad, but that's not all that bad. He goes into a cell in the dungeon. But literally what it says, picking up on the last verse, for they had made that house the prison. And literally what it says, as Jeremiah went into the house of the cistern and to the basement or cellar. So they put him in a cistern underneath the house. They, of course, dug a cistern to store water. When it would rain, they would drain water into there. And so this is a slimy hole dug out underneath the house. And so, into the dungeon, into the cell, you get the idea of bars and a little place to sleep. But this was a rounded place in the ground. Uh, can you imagine what kind of varmints would live in a semi-arid place like that, somewhat deserty place, in a hole underneath a house where they stored water? And he was an old man. He's probably in his 60s now. And so it's a very, not nice place to be. It's not even really a jail cell. Then Zedekiah the king sent and took him out of the cistern. The king asked him secretly in his house. So he took him to the palace, probably at night. He did not want people to know that he was helping. Zedekiah did not want people to know that he was talking with Jeremiah or having any mercy on him, because Jeremiah was so disliked by the people. The king asked him secretly in his house and said, "Is there any word from Yahweh?" And so Zedekiah is about 30 years old, or 30, might be 32, so he's a relatively young man. And he seems like uh, he seems like he might not be all bad. He has some mercy. He's having some mercy here on Jeremiah, and he does seem to care about God helping him. And so I really think, rather than just Zedekiah being a bad guy, I think Jehoiakim was kind of a bad person, um, as far as a king goes. But I think Zedekiah was more of a weak person, we would say. Jeremiah, so he said, "Is there any word from Yahweh?" Jeremiah said, "There is." Then he said, "You shall be delivered into the hands of the king of Babylon." So again, Zedekiah, I believe, is trying to reach out a little bit, trying to be nice, trying to seek God. Yeah, God did tell me more. He said, "You're going to be delivered into the hands." I'm surprised that he didn't tell Zedekiah, "Your 5 sons are going to be beheaded in front of you," or something like that. But Jeremiah, never the shy one. So Jeremiah just told him, "You're going to be delivered into the hands." And now Jeremiah, to me, is pretty bold. "Moreover," Jeremiah said to the king Zedekiah, "what offense have I committed against you, against your servants, or against this people, that you have put me in prison?" And another thing, he kind of lets him have it. "Where now are your prophets who prophesied to you, saying, the king of Babylon will not come against you or against this land?" So if you remember, I don't remember how this dates again, but earlier there was one of the prophets that struck Jeremiah. And, Jeremiah said, "You're going for 70 years into Babylonian captivity," and the priest or prophet struck him and said 2 years. And always the prophets who were professional prophets on the court of the king, they would prophesy, saying, "We're not going to be in trouble. God would not let his holy city fall. We're going to be okay." Jeremiah says, "Where are they now?" And so even though Jeremiah is somewhat confrontational, um, Zedekiah responds, I think, positively. "Therefore, please hear now, O Lord, O my Lord the king. Please do not make me return to the house of Jonathan, to the cell underneath his house, to the nasty cistern, lest I die there." And so really, I wish they'd have done a better job of translating, because just in this, a cell in the dungeon does not, I don't think, gives the full, thing. He might have been knee deep in water, in the cell, We just really don't know. He was in a cistern. Then Zedekiah commanded they should commit Jeremiah to the court of the prison, and we're told in Jeremiah 32 that it was the court of the guard. So it was the section of the palace which was the guard, where the palace guard, the military, stayed, and he got a tent in the courtyard there, in the midst of the prison. And so not only did he give him that nicer place to be in his own palace, and I think the dual thing there is, the guard could also protect Jeremiah there from citizens who would harm him. You know, he's had many death threats, especially the people of Anathoth, have threatened him. So Zedekiah gives him a nicer place, gives him some protection, and should give him daily a piece of bread from Baker Street. That is, until all the bread in the city was gone. Thus Jeremiah remained in the court prison, but Zedekiah had made provisions for him to take care of him. And so I think it is an interesting story. To me, it is a story that kind of redeems Zedekiah's character in a little bit. Zedekiah is a young man with the weight of the world. The most powerful army in the world has already come to get him, laying siege. He seems to still have some value for God's will and for prayer as an effective thing. And he seems to be kind of taking care of Jeremiah here, to have some measure of respect for Jeremiah, to protect him and make sure that he has food to eat. So that's where I'm going to stop. That's the end of that chapter. And we'll move on next week to chapter 38. These three chapters they're all in chronological order. So for once, we can look forward to the events that happen in chapter 38 to come after the events of chapter 37. Are there any questions or comments as we close today? Okay, well, let's say a prayer, and then we